Scott Steiner was not just a character, he was a walking bomb that no one could defuse. This is the story of when Scott Steiner snapped for real. Not the fake kind of anger you see on TV. Real fights, real blood, real police reports, and a career that ended not with a championship, but with a ban from the biggest wrestling event in the world. Most wrestlers can turn it off when the cameras stop rolling. They go home, they act normal, they have families, they have hobbies. They separate the character from the person. But Scott Steiner could not. He brought his rage from the ring into the real world. And when he did, people got hurt, companies lost control, reputations were destroyed, and the wrestling business learned a hard lesson. You cannot manage someone who refuses to be managed. This is not a story about a tough guy playing a role. This is about a man who let his anger destroy his own legacy, a man who had everything and threw it away because he could not control his temper. Let me show you exactly how it happened, step by step, incident by incident, from the moment he went off script on live television to the moment police opened a criminal investigation against him. The beginning of the end. Scott Steiner did not start as a problem. He started as a star. In the late 1980s, he was one half of the Steiner brothers. He was a college wrestler from the University of Michigan. He was strong. He was fast. He was athletic in a way that big men usually are not. He could do things in the ring that other wrestlers his size could not. He invented a move called the Frankensteiner. It was a flip that sent his opponents flying through the air. Fans loved it. Promoters loved it. Scott Steiner was going places. He had a bright future ahead of him. But then something changed. In the late 1990s, Steiner got bigger, way bigger. His body became a mass of veins and muscle. He went from being a technical wrestler to being a powerhouse. He stopped doing flips and started flexing. He called himself Big Papa Pump. He wore a chainmail hood to the ring. He yelled at the crowd. He kissed his biceps. He became a different person entirely. And that new person was not easy to control. The character of Big Papa Pump was supposed to be over the top. It was supposed to be ridiculous. But somewhere along the way, the line between Scott Steiner, the performer, and Scott Steiner, the person, started to blur. The anger he showed on TV started to show up backstage. The disrespect he showed to opponents in storylines started to show up in real conversations. And the companies he worked for did not know how to handle it. By the year 2000, World Championship Wrestling was dying. The company was losing money every single month. The fans were switching to the other channel to watch WWE. The ratings were in free fall, and backstage, no one was in charge. The inmates were running the asylum. The older wrestlers had control. They had guaranteed contracts with creative control clauses. That meant they could refuse to lose matches. They could change the script, they could veto storylines, and they did all the time. Wrestlers like Hulk Hogan and Ric Flair and Kevin Nash were making millions of dollars while the company bled cash. And younger wrestlers who were trying to make a name for themselves were getting buried. They were losing matches to guys twice their age. They were stuck in bad storylines that went nowhere, and they were getting frustrated. Scott Steiner saw this, and he hated it. He hated that guys like Hulk Hogan and Ric Flair were making money while younger guys got buried. He hated that WCW management let it happen. He hated that no one had the guts to stand up and say something. So one night, he decided to say something about it himself, on live TV, in front of millions of people, without asking for permission, without following the script, without caring about the consequences. The promo that broke the rules. It was February 7th, 2000. WCW Monday Nitro was live from the Brady Theater in Tulsa, Oklahoma. Scott Steiner was scheduled to do a normal interview segment in the ring. He was supposed to come out, grab a microphone, say some things about his opponent, build up a match, make people want to watch. That was the plan. That was what the writers expected. That was what the producers expected. That was what everyone expected. But Steiner had a different plan, a plan that no one knew about except him. He grabbed the microphone, and instead of staying in character, he went completely off script. He started attacking Ric Flair. Not the character of Ric Flair, not the Nature Boy, the real man, the guy who worked backstage and had power in the company, the guy who had been wrestling since the 1970s, the guy who was supposed to be untouchable. Steiner did not hold back. He said Flair should have used his cab money to fix his crooked yellow teeth. This was a personal attack. In wrestling, your appearance is everything. Your look is how you make money. And Steiner was mocking one of the biggest legends in the business for looking old and worn out. He was destroying the mystique of the Nature Boy right there on live TV, but he did not stop there. He called Flair a Buddy Rogers imitator. Buddy Rogers was the original Nature Boy from the 1960s. By calling Flair an imitator, Steiner was saying that Flair had no originality, that his entire career was based on copying someone else, that he was a fraud. Then Steiner said Flair was a backstabbing bastard. He said Flair had gotten talented wrestlers fired from WCW. He mentioned Steve Austin by name, Stone Cold Steve Austin, the biggest star in the entire entire wrestling business. A guy who WCW had fired years earlier and who was now making WWE millions of dollars. Steiner was saying that Ric Flair was responsible for that mistake, that Flair had sabotaged Austin because he saw him as a threat. And then Steiner said something even worse, something that made everyone watching realize this was not part of the show. He told the fans to change the channel. He said that if they wanted to see real stars like Stone Cold Steve Austin, they should stop watching WCW. They should switch to the WWF. He promoted the competition on live TV during his own show, while his own company was desperately trying to keep viewers from leaving. This was not part of the script. This was sabotage. This was corporate terrorism. In any normal company, a worker who tells customers to go buy from the competition gets fired immediately. No questions asked. You pack your desk and you leave. But WCW did not fire Scott Steiner. They gave him a short suspension, a slap on the wrist, a paid vacation. He was back on TV a few weeks later like nothing had happened. Why? Because WCW was so desperate for ratings that they could not afford to lose him. He was one of the few people fans still cared about. He was one of the few people who could get a reaction from the crowd. So they let him get away with it. They swallowed their pride. They ignored the damage he had done, and they brought him back. But the damage was done. Steiner had shown the world that WCW had no rules. That if you were a big enough star, you could say whatever you wanted. You could attack whoever you wanted. You could break the illusion of the show, and no one could stop you. Backstage, Ric Flair was furious. He was humiliated. He had been verbally destroyed on national television by a guy half his age. And when the show was over, the two men had a confrontation. Not a wrestling match, a real fight. Flair was in his 50s. Steiner was a trained athlete in his 30s. It was not a fair fight. Other wrestlers had to step in and break it up before someone got seriously hurt. This should have been the end of it. This should have been a wake-up call for WCW management. They should have realized that Steiner was out of control, that he was dangerous, that he needed to be reined in before things got worse. But they did nothing, and things got worse. The fight that went too far. Later that same year, Steiner got into another fight. This time it was with Diamond Dallas Page. DDP was one of the hardest workers in WCW. He was not born into the business. He was not a second-generation wrestler with famous relatives. He was a self-made star, a guy who started as a manager in his 30s and worked his way up to the main event in his 40s. He earned everything he had through effort and respect. He was one of the most liked guys in the locker room. But he had one problem. He was married to Kimberly Page, and Kimberly had made Scott Steiner very angry. The story goes like this. Someone found drug paraphernalia in the women's locker room. It allegedly belonged to another performer, but instead of handling it quietly, Kimberly told management about it. She reported it to the office. In the world of professional wrestling, this is a serious violation. You do not tell on your coworkers. You do not go to management with locker room problems. You handle problems inside the locker room with the boys. Telling management makes you a snitch, a rat, a stool pigeon, and snitches are not tolerated. Steiner decided to punish Kimberly for this. He bullied her. He intimidated her. He made the backstage environment so hostile that she left the building. And then, because that was not enough, he went on TV and cut an unauthorized promo attacking her character. He said things about her on live television that you do not say about another man's wife. He crossed a line. And he did it without asking DDP, without asking the writers, without asking anyone. He just did it because he wanted to. DDP was not going to let that slide. In wrestling, you protect your family, you protect your wife. And if someone disrespects your wife on national television, you handle it. DDP was not a hothead. He was not known for getting into fights, but he had no choice. He had to confront Steiner. He had to defend his wife's honor. So he waited for Steiner backstage. He waited near the entrance area, the place where wrestlers go right before they walk out to the ring. And when Steiner showed up, DDP confronted him. He told Steiner that what he said was unacceptable, that you do not talk about another man's wife like that there are lines you do not cross. Steiner's response was to tackle him. This was not a worked wrestling brawl where you pull your punches and make sure no one gets hurt. This was a real fight on a concrete floor, a shoot fight, a legitimate physical altercation. Steiner weighed over 270 pounds of solid muscle. He was one of the strongest men in the entire company. He drove DDP backward about 20 feet before they crashed to the ground. It was violent, it was dangerous, and it was real. DDP was not a small guy. He was 6 feet 5 inches and over 240 pounds. But Steiner had a significant strength advantage. DDP knew he could not win a striking battle, so he used used his grappling skills. He managed to lock in a guillotine choke. This is a submission hold that wraps around the neck and cuts off blood to the brain. If you do it right, it can make someone pass out in seconds. DDP squeezed as hard as he could. He was trying to choke Steiner unconscious, but Steiner did not tap out. He did not submit. Instead, he tried to gouge out DDP's eyes. Let me say that again. Scott Steiner tried to blind Diamond Dallas Page. He stuck his fingers into DDP's eye sockets and tried to dig them out. This was not a wrestling move. This was not a hold or a counter. This was an attempt to permanently maim another human being. DDP later described being in a fetal position on the ground trying to protect his eyes. He said Steiner's fingers were digging into his face. He said he thought Steiner was going to blind him. The pain was excruciating. The fear was real. To get Steiner to stop, DDP bit him. He sank his teeth into Steiner's flesh and bit down as hard as he could. That is how desperate it got. Two grown men, two professional wrestlers, rolling around on a concrete floor, one trying to gouge the other's eyes out, the other biting to make it stop. Eventually, other wrestlers broke up the fight. They pulled Steiner and DDP apart. DDP had scabs around his eyes. His face was swollen. He had to go to the hospital to make sure there was no permanent damage to his vision. The doctors checked his eyes. They made sure the retinas were not detached. They made sure he could still see properly. He was lucky. It could have been much worse. And what did WCW do? They made Steiner and DDP sit down with Eric Bischoff and talk it out. That was it. No fine, no suspension, no punishment of any kind. Just a meeting where they aired their grievances and shook hands. Because WCW had no power over its own wrestlers. Their contracts were guaranteed. They got paid no matter what. They could fight each other. They could refuse to work. They could do whatever they wanted. And the company could not do anything about it. Steiner got away with it. Again, he tried to blind a coworker, and he faced zero consequences. The drug test that never happened. When WCW went out of business in 2001, WWE bought the company. They bought the video library. They bought the trademarks. They bought the rights to the name. A lot of WCW wrestlers joined WWE right away as part of the invasion angle, but not Scott Steiner. He sat at home and collected his Time Warner paycheck until his contract ran out. He took the money and let his body heal from years of abuse. And in late 2002, he signed with WWE. He debuted at Survivor Series in Madison Square Garden. The crowd went absolutely crazy. Steiner looked huge. He looked like a superhero. He looked unstoppable. WWE put him on magazine covers. They built him up as the next big thing. They positioned him as a main event star who could challenge for the world championship. The plan was for him to be one of the top guys in the company. But there was a problem. WWE wanted him to take a drug test. Now, WWE did not have a strict drug testing policy back then. This was years before the wellness program. This was before Eddie Guerrero died. This was before Congress started asking questions about steroids in wrestling. But when WWE looked at Scott Steiner, they saw something that made them nervous. They saw a guy who looked like a cartoon superhero. Veins everywhere, muscles on top of muscles, zero body fat, a physique that did not look natural, a physique that looked chemically enhanced. So they asked him to take a urine test, just to be safe, just to make sure everything was on the up and up. Steiner did not refuse, but he did not agree either. Instead, he made a very specific demand, a demand that was calculated to embarrass the company and its top star. He said he would take the test, but only if Triple H took it with him. And not just that, Triple H had to pick him up in a limousine. Then they would ride to the testing facility together. They would walk in together. They would pee in cups together. They would get their results together. This was brilliant. This was a political masterstroke. Triple H was the top guy in WWE. He was the world heavyweight champion. He was dating Stephanie McMahon, the boss's daughter. He was being groomed to eventually run the entire company. He was untouchable, and his body looked just as suspicious as Steiner's. Big muscles, low body fat, incredible conditioning. If WWE wanted to test Steiner for steroids, they should test Triple H too. By demanding they test together, Steiner was calling out the hypocrisy. He was saying that WWE had a double standard, that they protected their favorites and targeted everyone else, that the rules did not apply equally. And he was right. WWE backed down. They never asked Steiner to take the test again. They dropped it. They pretended the conversation never happened. But this created a new problem. Steiner had embarrassed Triple H. He had challenged the authority of the top star in the company. He had exposed the politics. And in wrestling, that kind of thing does not go unpunished. Triple H had power. He had influence. He was in the ear of Vince McMahon. And what happened next at the Royal Rumble would haunt Steiner for the rest of his career. The match that killed his career. January 19th, 2003, the Royal Rumble, Triple H versus Scott Steiner for the World Heavyweight Championship. This was supposed to be Steiner's big moment. His chance to prove he belonged at the top of WWE. His chance to show the the world that he was a legitimate main event star. Instead, it became one of the worst matches in WWE history, a disaster that is still talked about over 20 years later. The problem was not lack of effort. The problem was not lack of talent. The problem was medical. The problem was that Scott Steiner's body was falling apart. Scott Steiner went into that match with a condition called drop foot. This is a neurological injury caused by damage to the peroneal nerve. The peroneal nerve runs along the outside of the knee. When it gets damaged, you lose the ability to lift the front of your foot. You cannot dorsiflex. You cannot point your toes up. Your foot just hangs there like a dead weight. Imagine trying to wrestle when you cannot control one of your feet. You cannot balance properly. You cannot run the ropes. You cannot plant your feet to lift heavy weights. You cannot do any of the basic things that wrestling requires. It is like trying to play basketball with a broken ankle. You might be able to hobble around, but you cannot really play. Steiner later admitted he had the injury. He said he wore a brace on his foot. He said he taped it up so tight it was basically a cast. He said he could barely walk to the ring, and WWE doctors cleared him to wrestle anyway. They either did not understand how serious it was, or they did not care. They needed Steiner for the pay-per-view, so they sent him out there. The match was a disaster from the opening bell. Steiner could not do most of his signature moves. He could not do the Frankensteiner. He could not do the Tiger Driver. He could not do the elaborate suplexes he was known for. He relied almost entirely on one move, the belly-to-belly suplex. He did it over and over and over. Some people counted more than a dozen suplexes in the match. It was repetitive. It was boring. It was painful to watch. And when Steiner tried to lift Triple H for other moves, he fell over backward. His foot could not support the weight. He could not plant his heels and generate leverage. So he would hoist Triple H up and then immediately topple over. It looked terrible. It looked like he did not know what he was doing. It looked like he was not strong enough to lift his opponent. At one point, Steiner tried to do a double underhook powerbomb. This is a move where you hook both of your opponent's arms and then lift them up and slam them down. It is a basic power move that Steiner had done thousands of times in his career, but this time he could not do it. He got Triple H halfway up and then lost his balance and fell backward, with Triple H landing on top of him. It was embarrassing. The crowd in Boston started out cheering for Steiner. They wanted to see him win. They wanted to see him become champion, but by the middle of the match, they were silent. By the end, some were booing. The match was so bad that the referee, Earl Hebner, threw his hands up in frustration during the match. You could see it on camera. Even the ref knew this was a mess. Even the ref could not believe what he was watching. There are people who think Triple H sabotaged the match, that he made himself extra heavy to make Steiner look bad, that he refused to cooperate, that he sandbagged Steiner on purpose to protect his own spot at the top of the card. There are conspiracy theories that Triple H deliberately hurt Steiner's career because Steiner had embarrassed him with the drug test incident. Maybe that is true. Maybe it is not. We will never know for sure what happened in that ring, but the facts are simple. Steiner was injured. He had drop foot. He could not perform at the level required for a world championship match, and WWE put him out there anyway. They knew he was hurt. They knew he was not ready, and they sent him out there to fail in front of millions of people. After that match, Steiner's main event run was over. He was supposed to be in the main event of WrestleMania 19 just a few months later, the biggest show of the year, the Super Bowl of wrestling. He was removed from the card entirely. He went from being positioned as the next big thing to a mid-card guy in less than 3 months. His credibility was destroyed. His momentum was gone, and he never recovered. Later that year, Steiner had surgery on his foot. The surgery involved 9 screws, a tendon transfer, a bone graft taken from his hip. It was a major operation, the kind of surgery that takes months to recover from. And WWE had let him wrestle with that injury. They had let him go out there and humiliate himself. This was not a snap of anger. This was not Steiner losing his temper. This was a snap of the body. Steiner's injuries had caught up to him. Years of suplexes, years of lifting heavy weights, years of punishing his body for the entertainment of fans. It all came crashing down at the worst possible moment, and WWE let it happen. They sacrificed his health for a payday, and when it went badly, they blamed him. The threat that got him banned. Years went by. Steiner left WWE. He wrestled for other companies. He went to TNA Wrestling. He won championships there. He got older. His body got worse. But his anger did not go away. If anything, it got stronger. And his biggest enemy was still Hulk Hogan. Steiner hated Hogan. He had always hated Hogan. He blamed Hogan for ruining WCW in the late 1990s. He thought Hogan was a selfish politician who only cared about himself, who buried young talent to stay on top, who manipulated bookers and promoters to get his way. And when Hogan Hogan showed up in TNA Wrestling in 2010, Steiner blamed him for ruining that company too. Steiner and Hogan worked together in TNA for a couple of years. It did not go well. Steiner thought Hogan and his partner Eric Bischoff were destroying the company, pushing older talent, ignoring the young stars, making the same mistakes they made in WCW. And TNA did decline during that period. Ratings went down. The company lost money. Eventually, Hogan left. But Steiner's anger did not leave with him. Steiner was not quiet about his feelings. He went on Twitter and called Hogan out by his real name, Terry Bollea. He accused him of being a fraud, a liar, a backstabber, a cancer on the wrestling business. He said Hogan's wife was ugly. He said Hogan was broke. He said Hogan was a has-been who could not let go of the spotlight. This went on for years. Steiner would post long rants about Hogan on social media. He would do shoot interviews where he would trash Hogan for 20 minutes straight. He carried this grudge with him everywhere he went. And in March 2015, it turned into a criminal matter. It was WrestleMania 31 weekend in San Jose, California, the biggest wrestling weekend of the year. WWE was hosting WrestleMania at Levi's Stadium. The Hall of Fame ceremony was at the SAP Center. Thousands of wrestlers and fans were flying into San Jose for the events. Hulk Hogan was going to be at the Hall of Fame ceremony. His wife at the time, Jennifer McDaniel, flew into San Jose International Airport ahead of him. She went to baggage claim to get her luggage, and that is where Scott Steiner found her. McDaniel did not recognize Steiner at first. She did not know who he was, but he walked up to her. He approached her while she was alone, and he delivered a message. A message that was not a joke. A message that was not a wrestling angle. A message that was a direct threat. He told her he was going to kill Terry as soon as his plane landed. This was not a wrestling promo. This was not Big Papa Pump cutting a heel promo to build heat for a match. This was Scott Steiner, the person making a death threat to the wife of another wrestler in a public airport, in front of witnesses, on camera. McDaniel immediately called Hogan. She told him what happened. She told him Scott Steiner had just threatened to kill him. Hogan flew into San Jose as planned, and instead of going to his hotel, he went straight to the police station with his wife. They filed a report. They gave statements. They told the police that Scott Steiner had made a terroristic threat. The San Jose Police Department opened an investigation into Scott Steiner for felony terroristic threats. In California, making a criminal threat is a serious offense. If the threat is specific, immediate, and causes the victim to reasonably fear for their safety, it can be charged as a felony. That means prison time. That means a criminal record. That means real consequences. The police gathered evidence. They pulled airport surveillance video. The video confirmed the confrontation happened. It showed Steiner approaching McDaniel. It showed them talking. It backed up her story. Steiner denied the severity of the threat. He talked to the press. He said Hogan was lying. He said Hogan was being dramatic. He said if McDaniel was really scared for her life, she would have called the police immediately instead of calling her husband first. He tried to downplay it. He tried to make it seem like nothing. But WWE did not see it as nothing. WWE saw a man who had made a death threat to the wife of one of their Hall of Famers. A man who was unstable. A man who was dangerous. A man who could not be trusted around their other performers and their families. WWE took immediate and drastic action. They banned Scott Steiner from WrestleMania 31 and the Hall of Fame ceremony. They sent his photo to security at the SAP Center in Levi's Stadium. They circulated it to all security personnel. They gave strict instructions. If Scott Steiner shows up, do not let him in. If he tries to enter, remove him from the premises. If he causes a problem, call the police. This was the final straw. After 15 years of incidents, after 15 years of fighting, after 15 years of threats and violence and chaos, this was the moment WWE said enough. Steiner was officially blacklisted from WWE. He would not be allowed back for 7 years. And because of the ban, the Steiner brothers could not be inducted into the Hall of Fame. Rick Steiner, Scott's brother, had to wait until 2022 to get his Hall of Fame ring. All because Scott Steiner could not control himself. All because Scott Steiner let his anger turn into a crime. The pattern of destruction. Let me connect all the dots. Let me show you the pattern that destroyed Scott Steiner's career and legacy. In 2000, Steiner verbally destroyed Ric Flair on live TV. He told fans to change the channel to the competition. He sabotaged his own company. WCW did nothing. They gave him a short suspension and brought him back. Why? Because he was a big star. Because they needed him for ratings. So he learned he could get away with anything. That same year, he physically attacked Diamond Dallas Page backstage. He tried to gouge out DDP's eyes. He tried to permanently blind another wrestler. WCW did nothing. They made them sit down and talk it out. Why? Because they had no power. Because the wrestlers had guaranteed contracts. So Steiner learned that even violence had no consequences. In 2003, he challenged WWE's authority by refusing to take a drug test unless Triple H took it with him. He exposed the company's double standard. WWE backed down. They dropped the test. Why? Because Steiner was a high-priced acquisition. Because they had invested money in him. So Steiner learned he could challenge management and win. But then his body broke down at the Royal Rumble. His drop foot injury made it impossible to wrestle at a main event level. He had the worst match of his career on the biggest stage, and WWE quietly pushed him out of the main event picture. This was different. This was not about his behavior. This was about his ability to perform. And when he could not perform, WWE had no use for him anymore. In 2015, he threatened to kill Hulk Hogan in front of Hogan's wife at an airport. And finally, after all these years, there were real consequences. A police investigation, a WWE ban, no more protection, no more second chances. The pattern is clear. As long as Steiner was making money for a wrestling company, they tolerated his behavior. They let him break the rules. They let him fight his coworkers. They let him insult legends on live TV. They let him do whatever he wanted. But once he was outside the system, once he was no longer useful, once he could no longer generate revenue, the real world caught up to him. And the real world does not care how strong you are. It does not care how many championships you won. It does not care about your legacy. It cares about the law, what it all means. Scott Steiner was never just a character. He was a man who let the business consume him. He started as a talented wrestler with a bright future, a University of Michigan All-American, a pioneer of high-flying moves for big men, a tag team specialist who could have coasted to a Hall of Fame career alongside his brother. But he wanted more. He wanted to be a main event star. He wanted to be the guy. And somewhere in that transformation, he lost himself. He became Big Papa Pump, a character built on aggression and arrogance. And that character took over his real personality. The anger was not just for the cameras anymore. The disrespect was not just part of a storyline. It was who he became, and he could not turn it off. GWW failed to control him because they were too weak. They were a dying company with no leadership and no structure. The wrestlers had all the power. Management had none. So Steiner ran wild. He did whatever he wanted, and they let him because they were desperate. WWE failed to protect him because they cared more about a payday than his health. They knew he had drop foot. They knew he could barely walk, and they sent him out to wrestle for a world championship anyway. They sacrificed his body and his reputation for one pay-per-view match. And when it went badly, they blamed him and moved on. And Steiner failed himself because he could not let go of his anger. He could not separate the show from reality. He could not understand that wrestling is a business, that you play a character, that you follow the script, that you work with your opponents, that you respect the people you work with. He thought being tough meant you could do whatever you wanted. He thought having stroke meant you were above the rules. And he was wrong. The wrestling business is built on illusion. You pretend to fight. You pretend to hate each other. You tell stories that make people care. And then you go home and live your life. You separate the character from the person. You turn it off. But Steiner never learned how to turn it off. The hate was real. The violence was real. The threats were real. And in the end, it cost him everything. He is remembered now, but not the way he wanted to be. People do not talk about his technical skill. They do not talk about the Frankensteiner, or his NCAA wrestling career, or his innovative offense. They talk about the Ric Flair promo. They talk about the DDP fight. They talk about the Royal Rumble disaster. They talk about the Hogan threat. They talk about the moments he lost control. Scott Steiner is a reminder that no one is too big to control themselves, that talent is not enough if you cannot behave like a professional, that you cannot burn every bridge and expect to keep crossing rivers, and that wrestling is a business. When you forget that, the business forgets you. He was banned from WWE for 7 years. When he finally returned for the Hall of Fame in 2022, he had to shake hands with Triple H. He had to stand next to the same people he had spent decades hating. He had to smile for the cameras. He had to pretend it was all okay, because that is the business. You play the game, you follow the rules, or you get left behind. Scott Steiner played the game his way, and he lost. He lost his spot in WWE. He lost his Hall of Fame induction. He lost his reputation. He lost opportunities. He lost money, all because he could not control his temper. That is what happens when you snap for real. The cameras stop rolling, the music stops playing, the crowd goes home, and all you are left with is the mess you made. A mess that no amount of muscle or anger or toughness can clean up. A mess that follows you for the rest of your life. Scott Steiner was a great wrestler, one of the most athletic big men in the history of the business, but he was an even better example of what not to do, an example of how to destroy your own career, an example of how anger and ego can ruin everything you worked for. And that might be the most important lesson his career ever taught. In the end, wrestling is not about being the toughest guy in the locker room. It is not about winning backstage fights. It is not about threatening people or breaking rules or refusing to follow the script. It is about entertaining people. It is about telling stories. It is about working together to create something special. Scott Steiner forgot that, and he paid the price. A price he is still paying today.